We are back again with On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMAPlay365. I'm your host Newsome, and we're here again at the Apex in Vegas for UFC Vegas 20. This event features yet another heavyweight fight in the main event, and this time it's between one of the hottest prospects in the division, Ciryl Gane, versus the powerhouse kickboxer Jairzinho Rozenstruik. This is a fight night that I'm really looking forward to. We've got some really good fights on the card, with an honourable mention going to Pedro Munhoz versus Jimmie Rivera, which has been booked 3 times already this year. I love this fight, and I really hope we get to see it play out this weekend. Nikita Krylov versus Magomed Ankalaev is also an amazing fight in the top 10 of the UFC light heavyweight division. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, there's a few things to mention in regards to MMA Play 365. We had a bad night at the office last weekend, with our only bet being Curtis Blaydes, which was the other parlay leg to Kamaru Usman, which I spoke about on the last episode. Blaydes started really well and was looking great until that one bomb landed from Lewis. And to be honest, it was quite unfortunate for the Blaydes bettors, but everybody knows the risks that you take when you bet against Derek Lewis. Also, with Rafael Alves breaking the record for the worst weight miss in UFC history, missing weight by 11.5 pounds, and missing the weight limit for the division above his weight class, our dog of the week didn't even run, as we had Pat Sabatini listed as the best value underdog on the card. But we roll on and we look to get it back this weekend. Remember, we have multiple packages on the MMA Play 365 website for all the UFC betting advice that you'll ever need. We also have various subscription lengths and options too, so to see our full service list, please go and visit MMAPlay365.com for more information or to sign up today. And let's break down some fights. In the main event, we've got Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Ciryl Gane. Ciryl Gane is currently the minus 265 favourite. The comeback on Rozenstruik at plus 225 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, when I first saw the odds release, I did think it was crazy. I did think the line was way too wide, but actually when I started looking into it, it does make sense. I do think it's lined quite fairly, but if you are going to push me for a value side, I do think because of the power that Rozenstruik has, and we saw it last weekend in the main event there too, I do think the value side probably is on Rozenstruik at plus 225, but as I said, it is lined relatively fairly. As for where the betting line moves throughout a fight week, the current trend is the money coming in on Rozenstruik as the underdog, and I do understand it. I do think we will continue to see money coming in on Rozenstruik, but I only think it's going to go so far before people start hitting back with Ciryl Gane. Ultimately, when both fighters step into the cage on Saturday night, I think we will see the betting lines roughly where they are right about now. Potentially Ciryl Gane minus 250 with the comeback on Rozenstruik at around plus 200. As for how this fight plays out though, it's a really interesting fight because both fighters have got a lot of hype behind them. People love to see these guys fight. You've got Ciryl Gane, who, when we talk about UFC prospects, he's up there in the list of legitimate UFC prospects. He really is that good. When he came into the UFC, he had this striking, this Muay Thai background, and you could see it in his tape, but he actually opened his first 2 UFC fights with 2 submissions, one against a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt as well. So along with that real technical striking that he's got, that we've also seen in his last 2 fights in the UFC, it just shows that Ciryl Gane is a very well-rounded fighter and is comfortable wherever this fight goes, and that's important for this fight, which I'll touch upon shortly. On the other side, you've got Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who he has that touch of death. If he hits you, he is going to put you out, he is going to knock you out unconscious, and he comes from a kickboxing background. He's got legitimate kickboxing experience. He's a very technical striker himself. He moves quite well for a heavyweight as well, so it's a really, really good fight. The problem that I've got with Rozenstruik here though is, although he's a technical striker, although he's got that kickboxing background, I just don't think he's active enough inside the cage, and we saw that in the Junior Dos Santos fight. Dos Santos was actually getting off on a lot of strikes, racking up that volume against Rozenstruik until that kiss of death struck and Rozenstruik knocked him out. I just don't think it's going to be as easy to do that here against Ciryl Gane, and that's my worry for Rozenstruik. And here Ciryl Gane is the more well-rounded fighter, and that gives him multiple paths to victory, and I think that's where we're seeing the justification coming in the betting line, because on the feet, I think Ciryl Gane will put together more volume. He'll be more active. He gets hit a lot less as well, so his striking defense definitely checks out for me. So you've got a guy that's difficult to hit, that pumps out decent volume, that's got good technical striking. He's also got power in his hands and his kicks as well when he really sits down on his strikes. But again, he's a nice, composed heavyweight. He doesn't try and rush in. He doesn't try and wing big bombs to get his opponents out of there. He's very patient. He's very methodical, and I really like that about his game. And I think as long as on the feet he avoids getting cracked by that big bomb from Rozenstruik, which evidence shows from last week that can be easier said than done, but as long as he avoids that big bomb, I think on the feet he does have Rozenstruik checked out for sure. And if he doesn't knock Rozenstruik out, if there isn't a finish throughout this fight and it goes to a decision, then you've got to assume that Ciryl Gane's got hit a lot less and struck a lot more. So you've got to favour Ciryl Gane from that technical striking aspect. But then Gane's also got that path to victory with the ground game as well. Rozenstruik is a bit like a turtle off his back. You know, when you take him down, he does struggle to get anything going. He can stay on his back for extended periods of time, struggles to get back up to his feet. And Gane can be heavy on top. He does have an element of control on top as well, where he would be able to remain on top for extended periods of time. He can get 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, or even more in regards to top time on top of Rozenstruik if he is to take him down. And there's that chance that he submits Rozenstruik as well. Like I said, Gane has got 2 submissions in the UFC already. He isn't just a striker. So I think with the multiple paths to victory that Gane's got, I think he's the better technical striker, the one that outputs more volume, the fighter that gets hit less, and he's also going to have a huge advantage should he take Rozenstruik down. I don't think he's going to have to worry about any offensive wrestling coming back at him from Rozenstruik, because that's not his game. Stylistically, I think this fight favours Ciryl Gane, and I do think that he has multiple paths to victory and he can win this fight in different ways. So I'm picking Ciryl Gane to win this fight. And in the next fight, as I've already mentioned in the introduction to this episode, we've got a phenomenal fight here in the UFC light heavyweight division. We've got Nikita Krylov versus Magomed Ankalaev. Ankalaev is currently the minus 340 favourite. The comeback on Krylov at plus 280 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do feel the line is slightly too wide. I completely understand that Magomed Ankalaev is the favourite in this fight, but at minus 340, you're talking similar betting lines to what he was against Ion Cutelaba in his last fight, and I think Krylov is head and shoulders above Ion Cutelaba, so I did expect the lines to be a little bit closer. I did think Ankalaev would be around minus 275, minus 280, which is where he opened on the betting line, so I did agree with that line. I think it's been steamed a little bit too much, but with that said, do I think that Nikita Krylov is a solid underdog in this spot, an underdog that's likely going to get the job done? No. So it's one of those fights where the favourite, the rightful favourite, is steamed a little bit too much, but I can't also say that there's value on Krylov because I just don't think he's going to win the fight. Spoiler alert there. As for where this betting line moves throughout fight week, I do think there's going to be some fluctuation. At the minute, there is money coming in on Krylov, it seems. I do think that might turn from plus 280 to maybe plus 250, which pushes Magomed Ankalaev to around minus 290, minus 300. I do think that's roughly where they're going to be at when they step into the cage on Saturday night. And as for how this fight plays out, anybody that's been following me over the years and listening to my podcast that I've put out there, you're going to know how high I am on Magomed Ankalaev. I genuinely think that with his skill set, he's got the potential to be the best fighter in the division, and I think he's going to be one of the hardest fighters for any fighter in that light heavyweight division to beat as well, just because he's so well rounded and he's solid everywhere. I do think he's going to touch gold in his UFC career. I believe that will be within 2 years. The only reason I say 2 years is because at the minute you've got a real jam at the top of that division. Obviously Adesanya and Blachowicz is fighting next week, and then you've got fighters like Glover Teixeira that I thought was the rightful number one contender. Then you've got Alexander Rakic, you've got Thiago Santos, you've got Dominic Reyes, you've got Jiří Procházka. So that light heavyweight division is insane at the minute. I just think with that traffic jam of fighters above Magomed Ankalaev is probably going to delay him getting the title shot for a couple of years, but I think once he does, I think he's going to win the title. However, we digressed a bit there, back onto this fight and how it plays out stylistically. I think that, and as I've already mentioned, Ankalaev is going to be a really difficult fighter to beat for Krylov, and I'm unsure of where Krylov actually beats Ankalaev in this fight, because if you look at the striking, Krylov isn't a bad striker. Krylov's actually a really good fighter and a really well-rounded fighter himself, but I just feel that he's going to be a step behind Ankalaev no matter where this fight goes. So when the striking, I do think Krylov's kicks and his speed in which he throws the kicks out could potentially cause some problems for Ankalaev, but I don't think it's going to be anything that Ankalaev is really fazed by. I think if Krylov starts throwing kicks, Ankalaev's got the potential to catch kicks, take him down. I also think he could potentially counter from the kicks as well, and that's something that we noticed with Ankalaev. His striking is getting better and better each time out. He's becoming more technical, more crisp, more accurate. He's sitting down on his punches more as well, and he's becoming a really dangerous striker. And then when you look at his wrestling, that's an area he really thrives in. He's got all types of takedowns. He'll shoot in for a double, he'll shoot in for a single. If he doesn't complete the takedown, he'll push his opponents back against the cage, then he'll look to chain wrestle. He's got body lock trips. He just got it all. If he wants to get a fight to the mat, I believe he's going to be able to get the fight to the mat. But it is going to be really interesting to see what game plan Ankalaev comes into the cage with, because if he does take Krylov down, in my opinion, that allows Krylov to play his trump card in this spot. And the one area I could see Krylov potentially being successful in is with submission attempts and with grappling if he's on his back. Now, Ankalaev isn't the easiest fighter to sweep or reverse, but if Krylov does lock up a submission and decides to use that submission attempt to sweep or reverse instead of to complete it or attempt to complete it to get Ankalaev out of there, then that could potentially sweep or reverse position. And we haven't seen Ankalaev on his back too much at all, so we don't really know if he'd be able to get back up to his feet very quickly. We don't know if he'd be able to handle Krylov's topside grappling. So those are a couple of unknowns, and that to me would be the most interesting thing to see in this fight, to see how Ankalaev would handle that. But with that being said, I do think it is a low percentage outcome. If those scenarios did happen with Krylov sweeping or reversing Ankalaev, I don't think it's very likely to happen, but if it does, the fight is certainly not going to be won and lost because of sweeps and reversals. It might happen once or twice if it was to happen, but I don't think that Krylov's going to be that successful in those scenarios to win the fight based off that. I think the fight is going to be won and lost with a mixture of striking and offensive wrestling, and I think that Ankalaev is just too strong in those areas in this fight. As I mentioned at the start of the breakdown, I just feel that Krylov's going to be a step behind wherever the fight goes. I think it is going to be competitive on the feet, but I definitely give Ankalaev the edge. I think Krylov will be able to defend some takedowns, but eventually if Ankalaev does want to get the fight to the mat, he will get the fight to the mat, and I think the top time will rack up and Ankalaev will be able to do good work with ground and pound and also running the clock down as well. So with the stylistic advantages and the fact that I feel that Ankalaev is the more likely fighter to both finish the fight and win a decision, I'm picking Magomed Ankalaev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Montana De La Rosa versus Mayra Bueno Silva. Silva is currently the -145 favourite. The comeback on De La Rosa at +125 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Montana De La Rosa. I think that there's an argument that she could be potentially a slight favourite. Maybe this fight should be a pick'em, but I do think that at +125 she is the value side. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, there has been some fluctuation here and there's been money coming in on Silva. You know, she is a dangerous fighter. I do like Silva as a fighter as well. I think she's fun to watch, so I can understand why there has been money coming in on her, but the more money that comes in, the more value that I think there is on De La Rosa. At some point, I do think the money will start coming in on the underdog. It'll hit a brick wall where there's just too much value, and when these fighters step into the cage on Saturday night, I do expect to see Silva sitting at around -125, -130 with the comeback on De La Rosa in the range of +105, +110. But as for how this fight plays out, I think that it's going to be a really competitive fight, and I think both fighters are going to have the moments for sure. In regards to the striking, it's very even, but I do think I'd slightly edge Silva on the feet. But De La Rosa's been making improvements in her striking. She has been looking better in the last couple of fights. She has got nice fundamentals, a good jab, a good 1-2. But like I say, I do feel that the striking edge is with Silva, and she is very aggressive. She'll come forward, she'll throw punches in combination, she'll look to push her opponents back to the cage, land short shots inside the clinch with elbows as well. She can be quite nasty, and that's the reason why, although De La Rosa has been making improvements in her striking, I do still slightly edge Silva in that respect. But where I do favour De La Rosa in this fight is with the wrestling, with the topside grappling, and that's been a feature of De La Rosa's game for years, and I do think that that's an area that Silva can struggle against when she's got a decent topside grappler on top of her. So you look at the Gillian Robertson fight, she submitted Gillian Robertson off her back, but before that submission came, Gillian Robertson was looking quite good on top. She wasn't really in too much danger, and Gillian Robertson can make very slight mistakes from time to time on top in regards to being a bit careless with her arm positioning and things like that, and she actually made a really slight mistake that Silva capitalised on and finished her. Without that mistake, I do think that Robertson would have definitely had more success on top of her. Then you look at Marina Moroz. Marina Moroz took Silva down twice in that fight. She looked good on top of Silva. She used her experience to remain safe, didn't make that mistake, and ultimately won that fight because of the top control. In Silva's last fight against Barella, she did submit Barella again from bottom, but Barella's top game isn't that heavy, and there was also a big discrepancy in the Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You know, Silva was just levels above Barella, and it showed on the night. That's not going to be the case with De La Rosa in this fight though, and this is where I think the biggest path to victory is between both fighters, and it's on the side of De La Rosa. I think De La Rosa will be able to get Silva down. I think her striking's going to be good enough to hang with Silva on the feet. There might be some sketchy moments for De La Rosa, but that could be a good thing for her, because if she is looking okay in spells but then just gets blasted with an aggressive burst from Silva, it's going to make De La Rosa think twice, and it's going to want to make her shoot a takedown, and that's where I think she's going to be the better fighter in this fight, because if she takes Silva down, I don't think De La Rosa's going to make a stupid mistake which allows her to get submitted. I don't think there's a big discrepancy in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I do think the top side grappling of De La Rosa is just going to be better than the bottom side defensive grappling of Mayra Bueno Silva. And I think that De La Rosa could definitely do that for 2 rounds out of the 3 in this fight. I don't think it's going to be a complete whitewash. I do think Silva's going to have enough moments in this fight to steal a round, but I think that that top game of De La Rosa, as long as she's got that wrestling game plan to come in there and take Silva down, I think she's got the skills to stay safe on top and grind a decision out in this fight, because I feel that that's the biggest path to victory in this fight, with the striking being quite close. I don't think we're going to see Silva try and take De La Rosa down. I think De La Rosa is the better wrestler in this fight, and that would show as well. I just feel that this fight is going to be won and lost with top control time. I just see this fight having extended periods of time on the mat, and I think that De La Rosa will be the one on top for that time. So for those reasons, I'm picking Montana De La Rosa to win this fight. And in the next fight, as I've already mentioned, one of my favourite fights on the entire card, we've got Pedro Munhoz versus Jimmie Rivera. Jimmie Rivera is currently the -145 favourite. The comeback on Munhoz at +125 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think it sits slightly with Jimmie Rivera. I think there is an argument he could be a bigger favourite, but if it does get too wide, sort of -160, -170, then the value would be flipping over onto the other side, with Munhoz being the value side at that point. But right now, I do think there's value on Jimmie Rivera. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, again, I think we're going to see some fluctuation. And bear in mind, we've seen this betting line move on 3 separate occasions already this year, because the fight's been booked now 3 times. So every single time that these odds have released, they've been around where they are now, and we've seen money coming in on Rivera, then we've seen money coming back in on Munhoz. Ultimately, when these 2 fighters step into the cage on Saturday night, I don't think the betting lines are going to be too far off where they're sitting right about now. As for how this fight plays out though, it's a really good fight in the bantamweight division, and although both fighters have probably missed that opportunity to become champions and get that title shot, I still think that these 2 are still 2 of the best in the entire division. They've still got a lot left to give. I don't think any have really declined or heading down that road to retirement. I still think they're both really solid fighters, and it's going to make for a good fight. I think this fight is going to potentially be won and lost on the feet though. I think there could be some wrestling and grappling exchanges, but I don't think there's going to be enough of it to really make an impact on how this fight ends, because I don't think there's going to be a finish on the mat. And if the fight does go to a decision, then again, I don't think there's going to be enough enough work done down on the mat to make an impact on the judges' scorecards in that respect. So I do think the fight is going to be won and lost on the feet, and ultimately that's where I do favour Jimmie Rivera, because I think Rivera, I wouldn't say he's the more active fighter. He can have fights where he is a little inactive, but he's definitely the fighter that has more impact in his strikes. His leg kicks are solid. He's got a hard jab. His combinations and his 1-2 combination hits really hard as well. It can really jolt that head back of his opponent. So when it comes to volume versus power, I don't think that Munhoz is going to completely run away in terms of volume, but he might land a few extra shots more across the 15 minutes again should the fight go that long. But the thing is, I think the volume is just going to get completely outweighed by the power here. And one aspect of Rivera's striking that I've already touched upon a little bit is that low calf kick. I think that's going to be a serious weapon for him in this fight. I think if he's going to be able to get off on that calf kick, and especially early on in this fight, I think it's going to affect the movement of Munhoz, which takes away a little bit of the volume. Once that volume's gone, then I don't think Munhoz has much left to offer at all. I think Munhoz could potentially try and, jump on a guillotine, pull guard and try and get Rivera out of there, or if Rivera shoots in a takedown, then potentially wrap up the guillotine that way. But when you look at that modified guillotine that Munhoz has, it's a seriously good guillotine to the point where both arms are wrapped up and the opponent can't really tap out physically. But the problem is Munhoz only really favours it on one side, which is the right side. We've seen him try to get it on the left-hand side when his opponents have shot in with their head on that other side. But what tends to happen is Munhoz does lock it up, but then he tries to modify that position and switch it over to his right-hand side, which runs the risk of the opponent being able to get out of the guillotine during that transition from left to right. I don't think that guillotine is going to be a huge threat in this fight unless Rivera does stick his head in on that right hand side recklessly and allows Munhoz to lock it up. So I do think this is a good fight for Jimmie Rivera. I think it's a fight that he's going to be able to get off on a lot of good strikes. As I've already mentioned, he might fall behind slightly with the numbers of volume, but I do think he's going to land the bigger action strikes. I do think he's going to land the more impactful strikes, and I do think he's going to be the fighter moving forward and basically controlling the pace of the fight. I think the striking is going to be relatively close. I think Munhoz might be a step behind for the majority of the fight. I think Jimmie Rivera is the better wrestler, so Munhoz is going to struggle to move into a plan B and try and take him down. I don't think Rivera is going to be reckless enough to stick his head into a guillotine, which is one of Munhoz's best weapons. So although I don't think this fight is going to be a whitewash, I do think Munhoz is going to have moments in this fight for sure, but I am picking Jimmie Rivera to win this fight. And in the next fight, this appears to be a short notice fight. I think it was only announced last week. We've got Angela Hill versus Ashley Yoder. Hill is currently the -325 favourite. The comeback on Yoder at +265 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, honestly, I don't see too much value if I'm being honest. I think the line is fairly accurate where it is right now. I do understand why Angela Hill's a -325 favourite. I don't think there's too much value on the side of Yoder because I simply don't think she's going to win. Another spoiler alert. So in regards to value, I just don't think there's value on that money line at all. And as for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I think at this point we're going to see some fluctuation. Bear in mind Angela Hill opened at -175, which to be honest with you is a really bad opening line and it got steamed almost instantly. I do think that the betting line of Angela Hill will go up to -350, -360, and I think that's ultimately where it's going to settle. I don't think we're going to see too much money coming in on the underdog. I just don't think that Ashley Yoder is going to be that popular at the betting window. So ultimately when both of these fighters step in the cage on Saturday night, I don't think that the odds will be a million miles away from where they're sitting right about now. As for how this fight plays out though, I do think it's a really good fight for Angela Hill. Being on a 2-fight losing streak could be a bit of a concern to some people, but to me, Michelle Waterson and Claudia Gadelha are two of the top fighters in the division and both levels above where Ashley Yoder's at. And both of those fights were also really close to the point where you could have argued that Hill won them both. And in regards to those back-to-back losses, I think this is a perfect fight for Angela Hill to come back after those losses, pick up another win and start driving towards the top of the division again. I think it's a difficult fight for Ashley Yoder and I think she's severely outmatched on the feet. fight in regards to technique and volume. I think Angela Hill is just a better striker. She uses more variations in her strikes with her hands, with her kicks, with a Muay Thai base. And like I say, she's got serious volume. She's got 5-round cardio. This is only a 3-round fight, so she's going to be able to go at a high pace from the start of the fight. I do think that Ashley Yoder's going to have a lot of difficulties striking with Angela Hill, to the point where she's just going to want to close up with Hill and try and take her down. But Hill isn't an easy fighter to take down if you're not like a brute force wrestler, which Ashley Yoder definitely isn't. She's more of a close the distance, get clinched up, get double underhooks, get a body lock and try and trip her opponents down to the mat. But that's going to be easier said than done against Hill, because Hill's got that Muay Thai background. She's also going to be good in the clinch, both offensively and defensively, and I don't think Yoder is good enough to at least take Hill down consistently throughout the fight, which is what she's going to need to do if she is going to win here. I'll never say that she won't be able to take her down, because it only takes one mistake, one misplaced foot, one bad piece of footwork to get taken down. But for Yoder to beat Angela Hill in this fight, she's got to get her down consistently and spend time on top and be active on top, because that's the other thing. If Hill's so active on the feet and Yoder just scores a takedown, does nothing with it, spends 60 seconds on top and Hill stands back up, the judges won't score that. Again, should it go 15 minutes? But I think that Yoder's in for a difficult fight here. Stylistically, she's outmatched. In regards to the skills and qualities in every area of MMA, I think she's severely outmatched as well. So I fully expect Angela Hill to get the job done. I think that she's going to be super active. I think she's going to land a ton of volume, and I think she's going to look great on the night. So I'm picking Angela Hill to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a low-key fun fight in my opinion. We've got Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres versus Kevin Croom. Caceres is currently the -210 favourite. The comeback on Croom at +175 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the value sits with Kevin Croom at +175. I think the line's too wide. I think it should be much closer, especially with Croom coming off that impressive short notice debut win against Roosevelt Roberts, where he finished him in round 1. Like I say, I think the betting line should be a little bit closer, and for that reason, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Croom. As for where this betting line moves throughout fight week, a lot of money is coming in on Croom at the minute. He was a much bigger favourite a couple of days ago, so money's coming in on him. It's closing the line up a little bit. I do expect that to continue, but I do think a brick wall might be around the -185, -190 line for Caceres, and if the odds do shorten up that much, I think we'll see a flip in the action. I think people will start putting money on Caceres at that point. I think when both of these fighters step in the cage on Saturday night, I think we are going to see Caceres at around the -195, -200 line, with Kevin Croom sitting at around +165. As for how the fight plays out though, it's going to be a really interesting fight, because it's another one of these fights where Caceres is going to want to keep the fight standing. He's going to want to use his movement to keep his distance and keep striking from the outside, because the game plan of Kevin Croom will be to be aggressive, close the distance, throw strikes to help close that distance, and then get inside of his opponent, in this case Alex Caceres, and look to try and take him down to the mat. That's the style of Croom. He likes to make these fights ugly, he likes to grind, he likes to push his opponents against the cage. If he can't get takedowns, he's happy to just push in the clinch and land short strikes in close quarters and try and rack up volume that way. So for me, the game plan is very clear on both sides here. It's likely going to be a very close fight. It's going to be the strikes landed at range, at distance, whilst moving backwards for Alex Caceres, and then for Kevin Croom, it's going to be the forward pressure and the clinching up and the takedown attempts. And I just feel with the cage being the smaller cage, if this was the bigger octagon, I do think that Caceres would have much more room to work and would be more successful. But I think Croom is going to have success in this fight in closing the distance and getting a hold of Caceres. I think he will be able to score takedowns. Top control, I'm not sure how much top control time he'll have, but if this fight goes 3 rounds, if it goes to the judges' scorecards, the judges will see obviously some strikes landed by Caceres, but I don't think it's going to be one-way traffic. I think that Croom's definitely got a good enough skill set to make this close on the feet, and if the striking is relatively even, the judges will then be looking for aggression and cage control and which fighters moving forwards, trying to really press the action, and I think that that's going to be Kevin Croom. So I'm not sure there's a finish in this fight. If there is a finish, I think both fighters are probably as likely as each other to finish the fight. I really wouldn't put an edge to one fighter in that respect. I think the urgency and the pressure of Kevin Croom is going to count for something in this fight. It's going to make him look like the fighter that's pressing the action to actually go and win. The one concern I do have with Croom is the cardio. Because of this grinding, grueling style, he can tire sort sort of halfway through the fight, so I think that he's got to do enough early in this fight to then win, because Caceres will probably take over towards the latter end of the fight. But I still like Kevin Croom here. I'm picking Kevin Croom to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Alexander Hernandez versus Thiago Moises. Hernandez is currently the minus 185 favourite to come back on Moises at plus 160 as the underdog. And as for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits with Alexander Hernandez. I think he is a fighter that is still developing from fight to fight, and I also feel that stylistically he is in a fight here that favours him. So I think the value's with Alexander Hernandez. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I think there's going to be some fluctuation. Moises looked great in his last fight, so I think that counts for something. I think people will be looking at that and thinking that he has a better shot than the plus 160 states on the betting line. But I do think the line can only go so low. I think if Hernandez got to minus 170 or minus 165, I think we'll see a flip in action. I think we'll see more money coming back in on Hernandez. Ultimately, when these two step in the cage on Saturday night, I don't think the betting lines are going to be too far off where they're sitting right about now. But as for how this fight plays out, I think it's going to be a really good fight, and I really like watching both of these fighters fight. They're both really entertaining. You've got Alexander Hernandez, who has that wrestling background with developing striking. I think you can put that down to the move to Factory X with Mark Montoya. I think that was a great move for Hernandez. Not only is Mark Montoya one of the best minds in the game, but he's also now got a lot of high-level training partners to train with day in, day out. So I think it's a really good move for Hernandez, and you're seeing those developments in his game. As for Thiago Moises, obviously he's got that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. He's a legitimate black belt in BJJ, but he's also shown improvements lately in that fight with Bobby Green. Bobby Green was actually proven to be a bit of a nightmare for a lot of fighters. He fought a lot last year and he looked great in pretty much every fight, but Thiago Moises was really solid in that fight. He was landing good counters, he was staying active, he wasn't falling victim to how Bobby Green fights, which is one of the reasons Bobby Green wins a lot of fights, because he's got a really unorthodox style and can normally make his opponents fall into fighting how he wants to fight. But Moises wasn't having any of it, and he was having a lot of success himself, and he was the rightful winner in my opinion. In this fight though, it's a little different. I think that on the feet, Moises is definitely dangerous with the head kicks, with the low kicks, and with the quick hard counters as well. But Alexander Hernandez, in my opinion, has fought and dealt with better strikers like Drew Dober, for example. I know he did end up succumbing to Drew Dober, but Dober's a legitimate striker, and Hernandez in the early stages in that fight looked very comfortable, you know, even when he was inside boxing range exchanging hard punches with Dober, where Dober actually thrives himself. Hernandez looked okay. So for me, I feel that Hernandez has got the better striking in this fight. I also feel that he's a little quicker, a little more aggressive as well, and you've got to expect some developments from fight to fight. So on the feet, I definitely give the edge to Hernandez. Where I do give the edge to Moises is on the ground. If he can get Alexander Hernandez down and work his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, then that's where Moises is strongest in this fight. But to get a fight down to the mat, you've got to wrestle, you've got to get a takedown on your opponent, and I also think that Hernandez is the better wrestler in this fight, both offensively and defensively. I think that Hernandez will be able to stuff takedowns of Moises. If Moises has a couple of takedowns stuffed, he's the type of fighter to sort of give up on them a little bit, continue with the striking, and again, that's where I just see Hernandez being better. If Moises can get Hernandez down, then he can absolutely work on him, and if Hernandez actually takes Moises down, I do think he can remain relatively safe. His Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu himself looks like it's okay to be able to hang with a grappler like Moises, but he does still have to be really careful on the mat, and actually taking Moises down does give Moises a chance to play his trump card in regards to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I'm not sure how many takedowns Hernandez will attempt in this fight. As I've said, I do think he could be safe, but it just allows a little window of opportunity for as long as that fight's on the mat for Moises to lock something up, throw up an armbar, throw up a triangle, or try and hit one of the leg locks that he likes to go for. But with that being said, I do think a submission on bottom for Thiago Moises is a low percentage outcome, and I think for the most part Hernandez would be able to remain safe on top, score points, and run the clock down. And because of that, I just feel that Hernandez has got multiple paths to victory agree here. I think he's the better striker. If for whatever reason the striking isn't working out for him, he can turn fights ugly and look to start grinding on his opponent against the cage and looking for takedowns, allowing his opponents to get back up and then taking them down again. He's got that style as well, and he's also got a decent top game should he want to get the fight to the mat. So I feel that Hernandez has a plan A, he has a plan B, he's potentially got a plan C as well, and unless he gets caught with a big head kick or gets his leg blasted from calf kicks early on in this fight, or if he does take Moises down and gets caught in a submission, makes a mistake, then he should win this fight. I basically think that Moises needs a flash finish to win here, and those are normally low percentage, so I'm picking Alexander Hernandez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Alexis Davis versus Sabina Mazo. Mazo is currently the -200 favourite. The comeback on Davis at +170 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the value sits slightly with Sabina Mazo. It is very close to becoming a little bit too wide, but at -200 I certainly understand why she's sitting in that range on the betting line. I do think that she's got a really good fight ahead of her. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, at the minute the current trend is the money coming in on Alexis Davis. Sabina Mazo was a much bigger favourite a couple of days ago, but again I think that money on Alexis Davis will only come in so much before people start getting in on Mazo and betting her back up. Ultimately, when these two fighters step in the cage on Saturday night, I don't think the betting lines are going to be too far off from where they're sitting right about now. And as for how this fight plays out, as I've already mentioned, I think it's a good fight for Sabina Mazo. I think Alexis Davis is going to need to close the distance, take Mazo down, and hope that she can get a grappling going, a top game going, and spend extended periods of time on top, because if she doesn't, or if Mazo is constantly standing back up and then they go back into the striking realm, that's where I really favour Mazo in this fight. I think Alexis Davis is declining a little bit. She's looking a little bit older. I've said this for a few fights now. She's still a good fighter, but I just feel that she's going to have problems against these young, hungry fighters that have got really good striking, really good movement and a ton of speed, and that's really where she's going to get caught, and that's really where the damage is going to take the toll on her, and I think that's what's going to happen in this fight. I think on the feet, Mazo is just a far better striker. She's quicker, better movement, and she's going to be able to land some hard shots in volume on Davis, and that's going to be a real problem. It might force Davis to shoot takedowns, which is what she needs to do to win this fight, but I don't think that this fight is going to be won and lost because Alexis Davis has scored takedowns throughout the fight and she's looked better on top and she's looked really active on top. I do think Davis might be able to get a takedown or two along the way, but I think Mazo's going to be able to find a way back up to the feet, and if this fight does hit the judges' scorecards, if it does go 15 minutes, the judges will be looking at the fact that Davis has taken her down but Mazo stood back up, and then Mazo's really looked to push the action and landed some really good hard shots on Davis throughout the fight, and I think that's going to take precedent on the judges' scorecards. But of course, if Mazo is landing those clean, hard, crisp shots on Alexis Davis throughout the fight, then she could potentially find a finish as well. So I think Mazo's the more likely fighter to finish. I think Mazo's the more likely fighter to look better in the judges' eyes should it go to a decision, therefore more likely to win the decision. I'm picking Sabina Mazo to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is going to be an explosive one. We've got Alonzo Menifield versus William Knight. Menifield is the slight -115 favourite. The comeback on Knight, the slight -105 underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, the betting line's almost a pick'em. In fact, it was a pick'em for the majority of the time that this betting line was released. It was only yesterday, the Monday of fight week, where Menifield actually pushed into the slight favourite position. I do think that either side's bettable if you've got a good read. So with that good read, you could play -115 for Menifield, or if you like Knight, -105's playable as well. I feel like it's one of those fights where whoever wins is going to look like this should have been a much bigger favourite. So like I say, with a good read, bettable on either side. As for where this line moves throughout fight week, I don't think it's going to move too much, to be honest. I think that Menifield might go to -120, -125, push William Knight to +100 or +105, and at that point William Knight will have that value with him being plus money, so money will come back in on Knight, and ultimately I think it's just going to fluctuate like that, and I wouldn't be shocked to see this as a dead even pick'em when they both step into the cage on Saturday night. As for how the fight plays out, like I've already said, it's going to be really explosive. One punch could end the night on either side. Both fighters are really big for the division. They're both really athletic. They both punch with tremendous power. So like I said, one connected punch from either fighter could put the other one out. So actually, to turn what I've said on its head about the fight being explosive, if both of these fighters come in with a lot of respect for each other's power, we could see quite a tame fight at the same time, where both fighters are really scared to overextend or engage too much in case they are caught and put out. So that is a possibility as well. But I like William Knight in this fight because I feel that he can match the power of Menifield. I think his volume's a little greater as well. Menifield's coming into this fight off a bad knockout against OSP, so who knows what is going to be running through his head. Who knows if he's spent enough time to recover from that KO. So I think Knight can methodically break Menifield down with his strike, and I think from a technique perspective, Knight is the better striker. He'll use some hard low kicks as well. He's just got to be careful that he keeps his hands up and he doesn't throw these kicks naked or steps in recklessly, because make no mistake about it, Alonzo Menifield can absolutely put Knight's lights out with just one punch from one mistake. So Knight's got to mind his P's and Q's, because in this fight, Alonzo Menifield does have the striking power advantage for sure. But one part of Alonzo Menifield's game that I don't really like to see is the fact that he over clinches quite a lot. Even when he's got his opponents hurt, instead of looking for the finish, he'll look to clinch up with them, and I don't really understand it, but it's something that he does every single fight. Now, if he does this against Knight, I do think that although Menifield, as I've already said, has got the punching power advantage, I do feel that it could potentially be William Knight that has the strength advantage in the clinch. And if I'm right, and Alonzo Menifield starts clinching up like he normally does in his previous fights, then I think that Knight's going to be able to turn him against the cage and land short, sharp shots inside of close quarters, inside that clinching range, dirty boxing, and I think that he would be able to score points that way. And ultimately, I think this is what it comes down to, because I feel that Knight's style, although he's got power for sure, I feel it's more a methodical breakdown, technical type of style when you compare it to Alonzo Menifield, whereas Menifield is more, I'm going to knock your head clean off if I connect. So I think that we're going to see Menifield land the harder shots, but I think we're going to see Knight look like the more technical, more composed fighter that's looking to score points and take a decision. And if this fight does go to the scorecards, then I can see William Knight winning it. Both fighters have a seriously high chance of finishing this fight for sure. It's definitely one of those fights where it could just be all down to that one punch. But if that finish doesn't happen in this fight, then I do think that William Knight's the more likely fighter to win a decision. And it's for that reason I'm picking William Knight to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ronnie Lawrence versus Vince Cachero. Lawrence is currently the -155 favourite to come back on Cachero at +135 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits slightly with Ronnie Lawrence at -155. And it's interesting because he actually opened at -185, which I think is closer to where the odds should be, and at -185, I think that betting line was much fair, but no value, if that makes sense. As for where this betting line moves throughout fight week, I do think we're going to see some fluctuation again. We've seen money coming in on Cachero. That seems to be the current trend right now, but then a little bit will bounce back on Ronnie Lawrence. Ultimately, I think when both fighters step into the cage on Saturday night, that the betting lines aren't going to be too far off from where they're sitting right about now. As for how this fight plays out though, I really like the look of Ronnie Lawrence. You know, his Dana White Contender Series fight showed him to be a relentless wrestler. He scored 12 takedowns from 14 attempts. His cardio checked out with that as well, so that's a good thing. And although he doesn't have the best topside grappling, he doesn't mind that, and he didn't mind that in the Contender Series fight, because when his opponent stood back up, he just took him right back down. So Lawrence looks like this real relentless wrestling type of fighter. But when you go back and watch his previous fights, you actually find that he's got a karate background. He loves his spinning attacks. A spin back kick to the body is one of his go-to weapons. And he also utilizes low kicks quite well as well, which is something that you've got to like in this day and age with MMA, because low kicks are such a dangerous weapon. In regards to his boxing, he's not that great, and that's where I give Cachero the edge in this fight. If Cachero can get into that boxing range but not go close enough for Ronnie Lawrence to start shooting takedowns on him, then I think Cachero could land some nice boxing combinations on him inside of that boxing range, really start to discourage Lawrence from closing the distance and looking for takedowns, and really make Lawrence hesitant to strike. And for me, that's the way Cachero needs to approach this fight: get inside of boxing range and land hard combinations to really look to start taking over the fight. But I think that's going to be easier said than done here, because Ronnie Lawrence, as I've already mentioned, is a really good fighter. He's a fighter that will look to be really active at range with his kicks, so he's got one range there. And then if Caceres does start coming in close and closing the distance, I think he will just go to his wrestling. He's the type of fighter where I've seen him win fights based on wrestling, I've seen him win fights based on explosive, effective strike, and I've seen him win fights with a mixture of both. So I think he's going to have a couple of game plans here. Because of that, he should have a couple of paths to victory as well. And I do feel that Caceres' boxing is just not going to be enough in this fight when you look at it from a bigger picture. I think if this fight does go to the scorecards, I don't think it's going to be a complete whitewash. I do think Caceres will have moments, but what the judges will be seeing is Lawrence landing kicks from the outside, scoring takedowns, and really mixing things up really well. And he really accumulates volume on the feet, which he doesn't have that one-punch knockout power, but he does have a finishing ability just from wearing his opponents down with strikes. And on the mat, he does look like he's got a bit of a submission game as well. I'm not saying Caceres can't finish Ronnie Lawrence, but I think Ronnie Lawrence is the more likely fighter to find a finish. And I think if it goes to the scorecards, he's going to be the one looking to have mixed things up better inside the cage and had more effective striking and grappling, and ultimately just look better in the judges' eyes. So I think that Lawrence is the more likely fighter to win a decision as well. For those reasons, I'm picking Ronnie Lawrence to win this fight. And in the final breakdown of this episode, we've got Dustin Jacoby versus Maxime Grishin. Jacoby is currently the minus 185 favourite to come back on Grishin at plus 160 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Grishin. I think he's going to have a difficult first round, which I'll talk about very soon, but from the most part at plus 160, I definitely think that he's the value side. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I think people are going to be on Dustin Jacoby. I think people are going to bet him up. I think he'll go past minus 200 and that will increase the value on Grishin, but I get why people like Jacoby. He's a really good kickboxer. Again, I'll talk about it very soon, and I think that he will get bet up the closer we get to fight night on Saturday night. As for how the fight plays out though, I've already mentioned two things about this fight. Firstly, that Maxime Grishin is going to have a very difficult first round, and I've also mentioned that Dustin Jacoby is a really good kickboxer. And the reason I feel that Grishin is going to have a very difficult first round is because Grishin isn't a very explosive fighter with crazy movement or anything like that, whereas Dustin Jacoby comes out fast and he comes out hard, and ultimately that's where I don't trust his gas tank and his cardio, because he has shown to tire out of the first round. But the thing is, a first round finish for Dustin Jacoby is so likely in every single fight that he fights, because he is a solid kickboxer with great technique, great power, and he comes out really hard with high volume. That type of fighter normally does have a high success rate of finishing in the first round. So if Jacoby comes out here and gets Grishin out in round one, then I'm not going to be shocked, and it's a legitimate outcome in this fight in my opinion. But the question that comes with this type of fight every single time is what happens if this fight enters round two. And for me, if this fight enters round two, we might see Grishin being a bit hurt, but we'll also see Dustin Jacoby look a little tired, and that's where Grishin can really start to take over the fight, because his style is about striking effectively, sort of in between kickboxing and boxing range. Neither one or the other. It's just at a nice range for himself. He'll be able to dictate the pace and dictate that range, and then when he comes in, he comes all the way and he'll close up in the clinch. He'll land short, sharp shots. He'll land uppercuts, elbows inside of that dirty boxing range, and he'll really start to wear on his opponent. Now, if Jacoby's already tired, this type of style is just going to absolutely empty that gas tank, and if he doesn't finish Jacoby, then this fight should be quite simple, comfortable, and easier for him the longer it goes on. Easy for him to see out, win round two, win round three, win a decision, unless that first round is that bad that it's a 10-8, then he'll be fighting for a draw and would need the finish. But ultimately, I do favour Maxime Grishin in this fight. I'll normally favour the fighter unless they're fighting in Gane that's likely to only win the fight by knockout in round one, which I feel is where Dustin Jacoby is, unless he has made improvements and developments in his fight IQ, in his cardio, and in his patience as well, and just being able to technically pick his opponent apart until it's time to really go hard. If that's the case, then Jacoby will win the fight, but I'm not making these picks and predictions on assumptions, on things that I just don't know until I've seen them. So for that reason, I'm picking Maxime Grishin to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it, and once again I'd appreciate all likes to the video and subscriptions to our MMAPlay365 YouTube channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the long shot fun parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK. Even if you only want our best value underdog for the event, which is free by by the way. We have plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, and they're all at very affordable prices too. Just hop onto MMAPlay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.